At the First Battle of Geonosis in 22 BBY, before a single clone trooper had established a secure position on the ground, 4,100 IG-227 Hailfire-class droid tanks were already rolling into formation across the planet's surface. Techno Union Hardcell-class interstellar transports had delivered them, each one carrying 2 missile racks, 15 guided warheads per rack, 30 precision munitions per vehicle. Each one originally built not for warfare, but for something almost more ruthless: debt collection. The InterGalactic Banking Clan had commissioned them to repossess property from debtors who owed Sandhill's organization money. Count Dooku pointed 4,100 of them at the Republic's ground forces on day 1, alongside a battle droid army numbered in the canonical billions, and called it an opening move. The Republic arrived at Geonosis with approximately 1.2 million clone troopers as its entire starting military strength. Count Dooku had already stated the ratio plainly: 100 droids for every Republic soldier. Working from that figure, the conservative canonical floor of the CIS battle droid force at that moment sits at approximately 120 million units, before the 3 million additional droids ordered in 21 BBY, before 2 more years of industrial output from a multi-corporate manufacturing network running simultaneously across dozens of systems. 120 million is the floor. The official canonical description doesn't give a ceiling. It says billions and stops there. In the older Legends continuity, before Disney's canonical reset, the figure climbed to quintillions, 10 to the 18th power, a number that reportedly exceeded the total organic sentient population of the entire galaxy. Current canon doesn't go that far. But even the conservative canonical count represents something the Republic had no rational answer to in a sustained war of attrition against a manufacturing base capable of replacing every loss faster than the Republic could grow and train a replacement soldier. The Confederacy of Independent Systems built the mathematically correct army for a galactic-scale war. Cheaper, more scalable, and structurally immune to the psychological erosion that destroys biological militaries over time. It had the numbers, the doctrine, the industrial base, and the economic logic. So why did they lose? That answer runs through the production infrastructure behind the army, then through the army itself, and finally through the man who was secretly running both sides of the war. Bactoid Combat Automata served as the primary constructor of the Separatist droid army. Its sister company, Bactoid Armor Workshop, was a Trade Federation-owned design firm that had originally specialized in rugged, all-terrain vehicles for civilian applications: cargo haulers, mining equipment, not assault platforms. The war mandate changed everything. By 22 BBY, Bactoid's facilities were producing the backbone of the most numerically dominant army in galactic history, on a scale that the Empire found worth cannibalizing after the war ended. You don't strip facilities producing nothing worth having. The infrastructure was enormous. 4 major corporate entities contributed distinct capabilities to that war machine. Techno Union foreman Wat Tambor formally allied the Union with Count Dooku and the Confederacy over internal opposition from other stakeholders. Tambor wasn't an ideologue. He was an industrialist who ran the numbers on a Confederate victory and committed accordingly. The Techno Union brought specialized mechanical and droid assets that extended Separatist military capability beyond Trade Federation's standard battle droid production lines, with different manufacturing philosophies and different technical specializations channeled into the same consolidated war effort. Commerce Guild Presidente Shu Mai contributed military resources alongside the Techno Union throughout the war, supplying material support to Confederate military operations and holding a seat on the Separatist Council, because the Commerce Guild's supply networks were genuinely load-bearing parts of the war's infrastructure. The InterGalactic Banking Clan operated at a different scale entirely. The IGBC was a financial commerce guild governing the galaxy's entire banking infrastructure from its main vault on Scipio, under Sandhill's chairmanship. When Hill pledged the Banking Clan to Dooku, 2 things transferred simultaneously: financial backing for military operations, including the purchase of 3 million additional droids in 21 BBY, and a direct hardware donation in the form of the Hailfire tanks the clan had already commissioned and deployed for its own enforcement operations. The Legends-era novel, The Cestus Deception, references Bactoids simultaneously operating and closing multiple plants across different systems. Not one flagship facility, but a network. Post-war, when Palpatine's empire rose, those factories were cannibalized and repurposed for other Imperial industrial production, which tells you more about Bactoid's infrastructure than any single production figure could. The Empire considered it worth the effort of stripping. The B-1 battle droid's design philosophy deserves precision. Win through numbers rather than individual ability. That framing usually functions as a dismissal. It shouldn't. An army optimized for industrial-scale attrition warfare doesn't need elite individual combatants. It needs reliable, replaceable units that maintain continuous pressure without morale degradation, without supply depletion from biological needs, and without any survival instinct overriding a direct tactical order. A B-1 advancing into concentrated blaster fire doesn't suppress fear. It doesn't process fear as a variable in its decision matrix. It receives the order and executes. When the units directly ahead of it are destroyed, it continues forward because the order hasn't been countermanded. Programmed never to surrender, B-1s carried self-preservation routines enabling managed tactical retreats when operationally indicated. Not panic, not routing, not the cascading morale collapses that unravel biological units under sustained pressure. B-1S held military ranks, including sergeant and lieutenant, operating within a formal command structure that, in the Legends organizational breakdown, scaled from 8 droid squads through platoons of 56, companies of 112, battalions of 784, regiments of 4,368, divisions of 21,840, corps of 109,200, to armies of 218,000 droids and support elements. That's the organization of a force that replaced biological soldiers at every level of its command hierarchy with mechanical ones, systematically, by design. Legends-era RPG sourcebooks place the B-1's production cost at approximately 1,800 credits per unit. These figures come from older reference materials, rather than hard current canon, so treat them as directionally accurate rather than precisely confirmed. But they're consistent with everything the canonical Star Wars book establishes about B-1 design philosophy. No food, no water, no rest, no pay. The B-2 Super Battle Droid slotted above the B-1 as a heavy infantry platform, significantly more expensive, as the canonical Star Wars book confirms directly, deployed in smaller numbers as a result, at roughly 3,300 credits per unit in the same Legends-era reference pricing. B-2s absorbed blaster fire that would drop multiple B-1s simultaneously and kept advancing. They weren't replacing B-1 mass, they were shock elements inside those formations, absorbing the ammunition expenditure that would otherwise thin the forward wave, forcing defenders to burn through their charges on targets that required far more punishment before going down. For positions that raw numerical mass couldn't take, choke points, fortified emplacements, objectives requiring immediate fire superiority before the mass wave arrived, the droideka was the answer. Rolling into engagement range in a compact ball at speed, deploying in seconds, raising twin repeating blasters, and generating a personal deflector shield that small arms blaster fire couldn't penetrate. Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi encountered 2 of them aboard the Trade Federation flagship and retreated. 2 Jedi, running. Legends-era reference pricing puts a droideka at roughly 21,000 credits per unit, 12 times the cost of a B-1. They weren't deployed everywhere. They were positioned at the specific locations where the tactical requirement was a shielded gun platform that couldn't be flanked quickly on foot, at choke points where mass couldn't maneuver but a stationary emplacement could operate indefinitely. Force-sensitive combatants were the one category of opponent that raw numbers alone couldn't reliably neutralize. The CIS had a dedicated solution. The IG-100 Magna Guard stood 1.95 meters tall, weighed 123 kilograms, and was programmed specifically to counter Jedi combat techniques. units whose programming was built around the specific challenge of engaging someone who can deflect blaster bolts and read intent through the Force. Magna Guards carried electrostaffs designed to survive lightsaber contact and could continue functioning after losing limbs because their critical systems were distributed rather than concentrated. Legends-era sourcebooks placed their cost at roughly 90,000 credits per unit, deployed sparingly, in the exact roles where that programming investment could be applied against the specific targets it was designed for. Vulture droids handled the naval fighter role in Separatist space combat, with one advantage no clone pilot could replicate. They could deploy landing struts and transition to walking on planetary surfaces, moving between aerial and ground operational modes without requiring pilot extraction. Republic fighter pilots lost in combat were gone, years of training, irreplaceable in the short term. Vulture droids lost in dogfights were replacement orders to the nearest manufacturing facility. On the heavy ground fire support end, OG-9 homing spider droids paired with Hailfire tanks in combined arms formations, their continuous beam dish cannons suppressing fortified positions at sustained rates, while Hailfires executed flanking maneuvers with guided munitions against the same targets. One platform forces the enemy to stay low, the other kills them while they're staying low. That coordination, one platform suppressing, one flanking, both autonomous, is combined arms integration applied to a force of entirely droid vehicles operating without a biological commander in the tactical loop. The IG-227 Hailfire-class droid tank deserves a dedicated section because its origin story is as relevant to understanding the CIS as its battlefield specifications, and because most analyses that promise comprehensive CIS military coverage skip it anyway. Before the Clone Wars began, the InterGalactic Banking Clan commissioned the IG-227 for a purpose with nothing to do with planetary assault, debt collection and financial enforcement. When debtors defaulted on obligations to the IGBC, the Banking Clan deployed assets to recover them. Those assets included large-wheeled, high-speed droid tanks carrying 2 missile racks, 15 guided warheads per rack, 30 precision munitions per vehicle. The wheel design was a functional choice. It gave the IG-227 speed and terrain coverage across broken ground that tracked vehicles with wider footprints couldn't match, critical when enforcement operations in the Outer Rim took place across environments that weren't built with armored vehicle access in mind. The guided missile systems allowed engagement of hardened defensive positions at distance before the vehicle needed to reposition. For a financial institution collecting debts in systems where the debtor had their own defensive capability, and the local planetary government wasn't cooperating with Banking Clan asset recovery, the IG-227 represented enforcement operating at a level of violence most recovery operations would never require. Legends-era sourcebooks place the unit cost at 25,000 credits per vehicle. When Sand pledged the Banking Clan's resources to Count Dooku, the Hailfire tanks transferred with the financial commitment, donated directly to Confederate battlefield operations, without new procurement cost for the CIS. A vehicle built and paid for by a financial institution for debt enforcement became a frontline battlefield weapons system without a design modification, because the Banking Clan had built it war-capable from the start. At Geonosis in 22 BBY, the Techno Union deployed 4,100 of them via Hardcell-class interstellar transports. They operated in coordinated formations alongside OG-9 homing spider droids, OG-9 dish cannons holding Republic formations in suppressed positions, while Hailfires flanked with guided munitions against the same targets. The Hailfire's documented combat record extended beyond Geonosis to the Battle of Mercana and the Battle of Abrion Bridge throughout the Clone Wars. Its structural limitation was the finite missile payload, 30 warheads per vehicle, and the CIS eventually transitioned toward the NR-N99 Persuader-class droid enforcer to address that constraint. But 30 guided warheads per unit, across 4,100 units at Geonosis, was a first strike munitions payload that no equivalent Republic ground asset on that field could match on opening day. After the Clone Wars ended, surviving Hailfire tanks were eventually adapted by the Alliance to restore the Republic during the Galactic Civil War. A vehicle commissioned by a banking cartel for debt enforcement, donated to a corporate military consortium. then pressed into service by a rebellion against the government that had destroyed every organization that previously operated them. The IG-227 outlasted every political entity that had ever owned one. The B-1 battle droid's most famous moment isn't a tactical engagement. A B-1, standing in a recently cleared combat zone with the fighting finished and the enemy gone, observes that the whole operation is considerably more enjoyable when the enemy isn't shooting back. The delivery is casual, almost cheerful. From a mass-produced military unit that had just advanced through defensive blaster fire as part of a mechanical wave, it's a line that lands differently than it should from anything running on a power cell. That single exchange opens the most genuinely contested debate in CIS lore. Is B-1 personality drift a canonical, in-universe phenomenon with a mechanical explanation, or a creative writing choice that made the CIS read as less threatening than their operational record warranted? The canonical answer is programming glitches. The official B-1 battle droid lore establishes that glitches manifested as personality quirks over time, droids developing a consistent habit of commenting on events around them, expressing what functions like opinion and emotional reaction. Malfunction, expressed as character. That's the in-universe explanation. The more mechanically specific version connects those glitches to the absence of regular memory wipes. Droids across the Star Wars galaxy accumulate experiential data over time, and without periodic resets, that accumulated experience begins expressing itself as behavioral drift. Standard maintenance protocol across most droid types addresses this through routine resets, ensuring units operate within expected behavioral parameters. B-1s, built explicitly on the principle of quantity over quality, weren't routinely wiped during extended campaign deployments. The production philosophy assumed most units would be destroyed before personality drift became operationally significant enough to matter. That assumption proved wrong across the duration of a 3-year war. B-1s survived engagements they weren't expected to survive, accumulated years of experiential data without the resets that would have cleared it, and the quirks became consistent enough to be observable across units as something approaching individual character. The post-Naboo droid brain redesign added another layer of complication. The revised B-1 architecture had a documented tendency to wipe the entire operating system if a memory reset was attempted on a specialized B-1 unit, which meant the CIS couldn't reliably wipe many B-1s, even when it wanted to, making personality drift effectively unavoidable across the fleet. The canonical explanation of programming glitches and the memory wipe deprivation mechanism are consistent with each other. Both can be true simultaneously. The separate question is how the Clone Wars television series chose to portray that personality. In the prequel films, B-1s are largely an undifferentiated mechanical mass. The menace comes through uniformity and scale, not individual character. Filoni's Clone Wars series shifted that register significantly. His B-1s are openly comedic, self-aware in ways the films hadn't suggested, expressing something close to existential uncertainty about their own tactical situations. Individual units react to being assigned to dangerous positions, observe engagement outcomes with what functions like dark humor, and occasionally show something that reads as reluctance before executing orders. That's excellent television craft. The use of B-1 humor as tonal relief inside serious combat sequences is sophisticated writing, cutting tension at the right moments and making the next serious beat land harder. But every scene where a B-1 cracks a joke while its squad is being dismantled around, it's a scene that moves a portion of the audience toward filing the CIS away as the funny enemy rather than the terrifying one. Whether the Filoni-era B-1 personality is a faithful amplification of canonical software drift that was always present in the system, or a deliberate creative pivot that optimized for character and dark comedy over raw intimidation, is a question where both readings have genuine textual support. The canonical mechanics support personality development from the film era forward. The tonal gap between the two interpretations is observably significant. That unresolved tension is precisely why the argument runs so long in comment sections, and it'll run in this one too. Build the case below. The Battle of Naboo in 32 BBY stands as the standard counterargument to the CIS military supremacy case, and it deserves a direct answer. Anakin Skywalker destroyed the droid control ship in orbit. The battle droid army on Naboo's surface powered down simultaneously. One pilot, one reactor breach, and an entire deployed military force became inert machinery in the same moment. A single point of failure capable of eliminating an entire planetary deployment is a catastrophic architectural vulnerability, and the Republic would have exploited it systematically throughout the Clone Wars if it had persisted unchanged. The CIS identified this and revised. After Naboo, the B-1 droid brain architecture was updated to reduce central control dependency. The revision was imperfect. Signal jamming, targeted EMP strikes on command relays, and precision strikes on Separatist command vessels remained viable Republic tactics throughout the war. But treating Naboo as the definitive verdict on CIS military capability requires ignoring 3 years of architectural iteration that followed it. Droidekas operated with genuine tactical independence. Magna Guards were fully autonomous. Later generation units incorporated progressively more sophisticated independent processing at the unit level. The response to the vulnerability was real and sustained, while the army deploying across hundreds of active fronts was simultaneously counted in the canonical billions. Armies adapt to catastrophic defeats. The CIS, after Naboo, adapted faster than most analyses credit them for. An army immune to fear, exhaustion, hunger, disease, and psychological trauma has a fundamental military advantage that no amount of training closes completely. Clone troopers were the best-trained biological soldiers in the galaxy, fighters refined through years of accelerated Kaminoan development and continuous conditioning, operating with unit cohesion under fire that no conscript army could approach. They were exceptional. They were also still biological, and the cumulative weight of that biology operated against them in ways that compounded across a 3-year war. Sustained casualties erode unit cohesion below the level of conscious decision-making. Commander losses disrupted tactical decision-making at the unit level, even among clone formations, because experienced leadership built on specific relationships with specific units couldn't be regenerated instantly from new personnel. Supply deprivation degraded combat effectiveness measurably over days. Environments hostile to human biology, extreme cold, vacuum, toxic atmospheres, high radiation, imposed physiological costs regardless of training, requiring life support systems and logistical infrastructure to sustain. 100,000 B-1s advancing on a fortified line would continue advancing until the defensive position ran out of power or the line fell, without any single unit becoming less effective because of what happened to the units beside it. The defenders, who are biological, watch a mechanical army absorb their fire and keep coming. That experience has a measurable effect on biological soldiers that tactical doctrine can't fully address, because it operates through the fear response that biological nervous systems generate when presented with an enemy that doesn't respond to the deterrence biology evolved to use against other biology. The Star Wars book states the economic version of this argument in 8 words. B1. Battle droids require no food, no water, no rest, and no pay. Those 8 words collapse an entire logistical case. The Republic's infrastructure for sustaining 1.2 million clone troopers across hundreds of worlds was genuinely complex. Ration chains, atmospheric life support in hostile environments, field medical infrastructure capable of treating combat wounds across dozens of different planetary conditions, accelerated replacement cloning programs to offset casualties on timelines compressing years of biological development into the fastest cycle Kaminoan technology could manage, and the full administrative apparatus coordinating all of it across a galaxy. Every resupply ship reaching a clone garrison was carrying consumables that would be consumed within days and require replacement. Every resupply ship reaching a droid garrison was carrying power cells and spare components the droids themselves could manage and conserve. Droid armies could hold positions indefinitely without resupply. They could be stored in cargo holds for years and reactivated without degradation. They could deploy simultaneously on dozens of worlds without the life support infrastructure that every clone garrison demanded. against a republic starting with 1.2 million clones, versus a canonical army counted in billions, backed by a four-corporation industrial consortium, replacing losses on production cycles measured in hours. The mathematical case for a CIS victory through sustained attrition isn't a close argument. Count Dooku wasn't a corporate opportunist or a mercenary ideologue. He was a former Jedi Master, one of the most respected in the Order's recent history, who had left, studied under a Sith Lord in secret, and then built the political infrastructure of the Confederacy of Independent Systems from the ground up. He negotiated the corporate commitments, recruited the council membership, gave the Clone Wars its visible leadership, and fought for 3 years as the recognized head of the most numerically dominant military force in galactic history. Multiple canonical sources confirm he knew the Confederacy was destined to lose. The architect of the CIS, the man who had personally recruited Wat Tambor and San Hill and Shu Mai, who had built the corporate military-industrial consortium that produced billions of battle droids, who had commanded the war effort for 3 years, had been told from the beginning that his side wouldn't win. He led it anyway, because the outcome was never the point. The war itself was the product. Dooku's master, the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, was simultaneously serving as Supreme Chancellor Sheev Palpatine of the Galactic Republic. Palpatine held both positions for the entire duration of the Clone Wars. As Supreme Chancellor, he controlled Republic military strategy, approved command appointments, authorized military budgets, and accumulated emergency executive powers that the Senate granted him because the war demanded it, and the war never seemed to end. As Darth Sidious, he was the secret master of the man commanding the enemy, with full visibility into Confederate strategy, capable of steering both sides toward outcomes that served his actual agenda. That agenda was the war itself, running long enough and hard enough to achieve specific political and personal objectives that required both armies to remain functional right up until the moment he needed them gone. Every emergency power Palpatine accumulated during the Clone Wars required the threat to persist. Embedding the Jedi Order in military command structures, deploying Jedi as battlefield generals across hundreds of fronts, rather than leaving them in their traditional peacekeeping role, required the war to run long enough to make that deployment feel permanent and normal. The moral compromises forced on Jedi commanders by years of battlefield decisions with no good options, the psychological erosion of watching clone soldiers die under their command, the specific grinding damage done to Anakin Skywalker through loss and trauma and impossible choices across 3 years of war, all of it required the conflict to run at full intensity for the full duration. Sidious needed the Clone Wars to be a real war. He needed the CIS army to be genuinely threatening enough to justify everything happening on the Republic side. He needed billions of battle droids, and Hailfire tanks, and droidicas, and Magna Guards, because a fake war wouldn't have frightened the Senate enough, wouldn't have justified the emergency powers, wouldn't have given him Anakin's transformation in the form he needed it. Dooku appears to have understood a version of this plan. Canonical sources consistently point toward his awareness that the Confederacy wouldn't ultimately prevail. What the canonical record suggests he didn't fully account for was his own position at the end of it. Aboard the Invisible Hand above Coruscant in 19 BBY, Anakin Skywalker killed Count Dooku at Palpatine's quiet instruction. Dooku's hands had been bound. The fight was over. Palpatine told Anakin to execute him. The man who had built the Confederacy, who had personally negotiated with every corporate partner, who had led a 3-year war knowing it was rigged, was killed by the Sith Lord's next investment, the moment that investment no longer needed him. The CIS continued fighting under Grievous. Palpatine continued accumulating power until there was nothing left to accumulate. Order 66. Transmitted to clone army units across hundreds of worlds simultaneously. Execute the Jedi Generals. The execution was immediate and nearly total because the instruction didn't require the clones to make a decision. Years before the war began, the Kaminoan growth program had incorporated behavioral modification chips into the clone template, chips that bypassed conscious volition and compelled the targeting of Jedi commanders on specific command. Jango Fett's genetic template had been modified for this purpose before a single clone was grown, before the first battle droid was produced, before Geonosis. The army the Republic believed was its salvation had been manufactured with a terminal function the Republic knew nothing about. On Mustafar, at the same time, Darth Vader arrived. The Separatist Council had been assembled there, under the promise of safety. The war was ending, they were told. The man coming was their protector. Newt Gunray was there, the Trade Federation viceroy, whose organization had provided Bactoid's manufacturing infrastructure, the foundational production capacity that had made the CIS military possible. Wat Tambor was there, the Techno Union foreman who had formally allied the Union with Dooku, who had personally overseen the deployment of 4,100 Hailfire tanks at Geonosis on the first day. San Hill was there, the Banking Clan chairman who had pledged financial backing, funded 3 million additional droids in 21 BBY, and donated the debt collection vehicles that had become the war's most effective mobile artillery platform. Shu Mai of the Commerce Guild, every surviving member of the corporate leadership that had built, funded, and supplied the most numerically dominant military force in galactic history for 3 years of industrialized warfare. Vader moved through them methodically, not arrested, not negotiated with, not offered terms in exchange for surrender. He assassinated each member of the Separatist Council on Mustafar. The full corporate and political leadership of the Confederate war effort, eliminated in a single operation on a volcanic planet they had been told was sanctuary. When the last of them was dead, the shutdown signal reached the droid armies. Billions of battle droids, deployed across hundreds of worlds, standing in the combined arms formations that 3 years of warfare had refined, positioned on the fronts they had been holding, powered down simultaneously. The war that had consumed the full industrial output of 4 major corporate entities across the entire breadth of the galaxy ended in a single night. Not through military defeat, not through an engagement the droids lost on any battlefield, but through a signal from above, sent by the man who had secretly architected the whole thing from both sides. Killing the Separatist Council effectively ended the Clone Wars, and kept Darth Sidious's simultaneous control of both sides completely hidden from the public. No one who survived possessed the full picture. The Republic's citizens were told they had won. The Separatist membership was dead before any of them could warn anyone about what had actually been done to them. Grievous was already dead. Dooku was already dead. Every person with direct knowledge of Sidious's role in CIS leadership was gone. After Mustafar, Bactoid Armor Workshop's factories, the same network of facilities that had been producing battle droids at industrial scale across dozens of systems, that had equipped 4 corporate militaries across 3 years of continuous multi-front conflict, were cannibalized. Stripped down and repurposed for other imperial industrial production by the government that had just killed every civilian leader who had ever commissioned them. The greatest war machine the galaxy had produced was dismantled by the administration that had secretly required it to exist. The math behind the Separatist war machine was flawless. Billions of battle droids against 1.2 million clones, backed by a 4-corporation manufacturing consortium that could replace losses on industrial cycles measured in hours. A combined arms force with dedicated solutions at every tactical tier. B-1 mass infantry, B-2 shock units, droidicas that 2 Jedi retreated from, Magna Guards programmed specifically to kill Force sensitives, Vulture droid naval fighters that could walk on planetary surfaces when the space engagement was over, OG-9 suppression artillery, and 4,100 Hailfire tanks that had started as debt collection hardware and ended up deployed as the opening armored wave of a galactic war. A force requiring no food, no water, no rest, no pay, no atmospheric life support, no field medical infrastructure, and no management of the psychological erosion that 3 years of sustained combat imposes on biological armies. The droid army didn't lose because droids were bad soldiers. It was never beaten in any conventional military sense. No final engagement where the Republic outfought the Confederacy. No decisive campaign where the manufacturing base was genuinely exhausted. It was deactivated. Shut down from above, in a single night, by the man who had secretly been running the enemy it had spent 3 years fighting. Palpatine needed the CIS credible enough to frighten the Senate, threatening enough to keep the Jedi deployed across hundreds of fronts rather than watching Coruscant, and durable enough to sustain 3 years of war until Anakin Skywalker was ready to turn. The army that should have ground the Republic down through sustained industrial attrition was running on a clock the Republic didn't know existed, built by leadership that had been told from the beginning that winning wasn't the objective. Count Dooku knew the Confederacy was destined to lose and led it anyway. He died on Palpatine's instruction before the war ended. The Separatist Council died on Mustafar believing they were being rescued. The droid army stood down across 100 worlds without a last engagement, without a final order, without a battle it got to lose on its own terms. The CIS had the best army. They just had the worst ally in the history of the galaxy. If you think the droids should have won, if you have evidence for the prosecution this script missed, make the case in the comments. Subscribe for more lore forensics like this.